So welcome everyone to the Watercolor and Pen Pelican. Thank you for remembering about this one. I haven't been able to get the newsletter out. I promised to do that by this Friday, especially as we're going into, I have some more added for August. So we will be, as always, we record this. That's what I meant to say. So I'm just going to make sure that a few people are muted just to I hear a little bit of background. Okay. All right. I think we're good. My name is Anita Thompson. I know just about all of you. There are some new faces on here. Welcome. I teach art workshops for mostly libraries. It's one of my favorite things to do, and for all ages. And what we're going to do tonight is the watercolor and pen Pelican. We're going to be using 9 by 12 watercolor paper. And I don't know if I ever mentioned this, but I find that 140 pounds works the best. So I don't know if some of you are getting like the 90 pounds. They like to advertise 90 pounds a lot, but I find 140 pounds is really the minimum to work with. So if you are having issues with watercolor, the type of watercolor paper might help you out as far as, it's heavier. So you might want to give that a try. Okay, so we're recording this. You will receive the recording either tomorrow or sometime this week. Sabrina from Warminster Library will send that out. Thank you to the Friends of Warminster Library for sponsoring this program and all of you for continuing to show up. And we're going to get started. So we're going to start first with our drawing. And I'm going to just hold this up in case anybody wants to take a quick picture before we start. Some people like to do that. All right. And what I'll be doing for those that are new, I usually kind of zoom in and out depending on what section that we are working in. I'm doing an overall right now just because we are going to be drawing it. So we need our pencil. And we're going to make sure to put our Pelican in the middle of the page. So that's going to go about right here. Let me make sure that there we go. I needed to adjust my camera a little bit. And so we're going to go for the overall shape as we always do. So we're going to start off and make sure that we have our, well, first we're going to start off with the Pelican, and then we're going to make sure that we have enough room for the post that the Pelican is on. So if your post is smaller than mine, if it ends up smaller than mine, that's okay. But what we're going to try to do is we're going to sort of measure about where our Pelican is. So he's going to be, the top of him is going to be right here. And so I'm going to put sort of just a line for that. And the bottom of the Pelican is about right here. So if you look at my paper, you can see about where he should start and stop. And then we can sort of make a quick shape of our stump here. So this is just our very basic shape. We always look at very basic shapes. So this is more square-like. And, we'll round out the corners. We'll make it look more like a stump. But it always helps to start with the general shapes of things, being if it's a circle or a cylinder or a triangle. If you can kind of get, a shape that you know in there, it's very helpful for when you start to draw. Okay, so now we are going to draw our Pelican. And I always recommend drawing lightly. I draw darker since it doesn't show up as well on Zoom. And so we're going to start off with his head and his very, very long beak. And I may be adjusting this. I think it's got to be longer, actually. Yep, got to be longer. For my, there we are. And so here again, I'm kind of making the basic shape, but I'm adding a few details just because I know that um, it's kind of easy to add some of these details early on. And I'm going to add the shape of his eye. Now these are not, they're not really fine details. We're just kind of getting the basic shapes in, even with the details. I'm going to round out his head and just making his eye right now. And so with his neck, if you notice, it starts to go in to the left a little bit. He's got a little bump like right here, almost like kind of like an S formation almost. And his beak is right up against his body. So we've got this part of his neck. And then we're going to make his body. I feel like I may have made him a little bit long in the neck. Yep, I did. And the other thing that I want to do is I now want to extend out his beak a bit more from his body. So if you look, something called negative space, which is this space in between sort of 2 points or two objects. It's not really space, but it helps with when you're drawing. So for instance, I looked and wondered why his beak looked very strange. And it was because I wasn't paying attention to the negative space here. It's very helpful. So that's much better. And now we've got his belly. And I'm going to draw a general stick figure for his legs so that I know about where they are. And so I can also tell if I need to make the legs longer, which I'm realizing I made my stump a little bit too high. And his leg needs to be longer. But that's why at first we draw very lightly so that, we can fix fix all of our previous lines. And drawing his underbelly here. And the same thing as far as, we look at the total shape of his wings. And his feathers. So it bends a little bit as it goes toward the back. And let's not forget his other leg that is in shadow. And I'm putting just the slightest bit of a line in between these two feathers. So far, that's our basic, our very basic drawing here. I'm going to make his feathers kind of dip down here. He's got, nice poofy feathers, and then it kind of dips like this. And here again, that's the general shape. We're going to go back and make more detail. But we also want to make sure, let me move up my camera here so you can see the bottom. We're going to go to the stump. And we're going to make sure that we draw in the rope. And so I usually draw things like a line first so that I know where it's going to go. And this kind of curves around. And then we're going to make it three-dimensional. Remember, it's curving around. So you would see just a little bit of it, and you can see it curling around the pole. I like to use um, my kneaded eraser for this because I wish they made kneaded erasers on the back of pencils. Wouldn't that be great? It's like, because I have to keep, I'm sure everyone else does this too. I want to use the eraser on the back of my pencil. You know what? Why don't I just, we'll see. We'll see how that works. I may have just invented something, everyone, and you saw it here first. Sure somebody's invented this. I should look it up on Amazon. Okay. So I'm going to draw the other part of the rope here, and then again, going to make this part three-dimensional. And this is where we start to create the knotting for it. So I'm going to go in really close. So again, we're going to make it look rope-like. There's a little piece on the edge here too. And the thing that'll really make this look more like a rope, besides just the curved lines, is because rope is when it's sort of strung, the way it's braided, right? Part of it, it's like puffy on the outside. So if you go like this, it looks even more realistic. So in each section. And we're going to do the same on the other side. Again, making it puffy. Now, I like to add my details of the wood later on. But if you feel like you want to draw those in now, you can, So we're also going to look at that. Look at that. I think I did invent something. So we're going to make it look more wood-like by erasing the outer lines and making it a little more bumpy, just like wood would be. We want to make sure that we have a bit of a top portion so that he can stand on it. And then this is where, if you want, you could make the wood grain. I did this just with the pen afterward because we go first with the watercolor and then afterward with the pen. Now, you're welcome if you know that your pen doesn't, kind of doesn't bleed with the water, you could start off with the pen, but I like to leave it for afterward, but that's just me. I'll be showing you it after the fact, after we do the watercolor portion. But so I'm just kind of quickly making some marks to make it look more like wood. I'll probably add more with the pen later on, but it's pretty good so far. I'll let everybody catch up. Excuse my maneuvering. And the other thing that we want to do now is, pay attention to the details at this point and go back and create things like, the center of his beak, sort of the line work that's happening there, making sure his beak is long enough. Creating the black area in between where his beak is and his eyes on his neck. So basically, we're now just going back to the details because our next step is starting the watercolor with the sky. So I'm also drawing the sections where, his coloring is changing. Oh, sure. I can zoom in on his face. Absolutely. Oops, sorry. That's a little. And then what we're going to do for his feathers here along the edge, sort of make a shape of the smaller feathers about right here. So I'm making a line for those smaller feathers that are going to be more like, you know, kind of U-shaped like this. We're going to go back and do. But then these are the longer feathers that are underneath. And so they're a little bit at an angle. And we can make a few kind of peeking through underneath. That's about where I want to stop with those. And then they change direction and get a little bit longer. You know, still, you know, there's different layers. And so they get a little bit smaller as we're coming here around the side. And then we see that there are long, you know, long feathers here that are layered on top of each other until we only see, you know, the tips of them over there. And so the way the feathers would look, you know, they're kind of starting to bunch into not a point, but a little bit pointier. Just kind of cleaning up this area. Oops. Thought I was cleaning up that area. And there's a little bit of a separation here. And then this is the other side of the feathers. So this line here is where it separates, and then we go in and kind of make almost like V-like shapes for the feathers along this line, and we make them layered. I'm going to make this a little darker so you can see it. And then I make suggestions of the feathers in this space so that you get the idea that there are a lot of feathers happening and he's very fluffy. But we don't have to draw each single one. I keep adding too much to this other wing. I don't know why I keep doing that. The other thing we're going to do is, you know, we're also going to be adding, you know, fluffiness to the edge here. So I'm going to show this up close. So what I mean is, you know, we take our lines and we're treating it, because it is like fur, right? And so we're making line work that is curving in the direction that the fur is laying in. So his fur on top is kind of going like this, right? Almost like a hook almost like in the shape of a hook, right? And then sometimes it kind of lays on top. And so making lines at the bottom of each section as well makes it look like the fur is gathered. So you want to do some of that as well, especially along the edge of his body here. So I like to wait until I do it with the pen, but you are welcome to, kind of plan that out right now. So I'm going to kind of pop up a little bit in his belly. And so, that would kind of look like, again, on the edge here, I'm going to make it look like feathers, but then lots of little line work. And I want the feathers, the line work to also go outward like this. So I'm gonna, again, go close. So all these little lines, right? And it gets a little bit darker underneath his legs. I also want to make sure we draw his legs. He's got a little bit of, a bump here. I don't know if they have knees, but I like to think that's kind of like his knee. And then this is all in dark. So I'm going to draw sort of the feathers on top, and then this is all in shadow. And he's got some underneath his feathers as well. Let me go up, kind of show you the whole thing. I'm going to make his feathers come out a little bit more that way. I'll let everybody catch up because our next part is we're going to be doing the kind of cloudy sky. I'll let everybody catch up a bit. So I do have a pen that is waterproof, but I'm gonna wait for everybody in case yours isn't. And then just take a look and see if you have anything you need to erase. Like I'm kind of doing that now because my hands kind of had pencil on them and they're making marks on the paper. But our next step is we are going to be mixing up, oops, sorry, adjust this one more time. There we go. I think my gooseneck here is getting old. I think I have to get a new one. So we're going to be mixing up some blue. We've got some darker blue, and I'm going to show it on the side here in my plastic. I'm going to mix up some blue, and then I'm also going to mix up some gray. So I am using, because this is a very basic set, I'm using the blue and the black in order to get like a darker bluish for the sky. But we're going to first use like a regular blue watered down. Now, depending if you're using Crayola, Crayola is much brighter than this set that I'm using. I'm using, it's called Color Swell. It's just a very basic set that I get in bulk on Amazon. So their blue is much more of like a royal blue, whereas the Crayola set, the basic Crayola set, is more like a almost like a sky blue. So you may have to mix a little bit of some purple in with it to get a little more of like a royal blue. So again, the blue, if you want to get it a little bit darker, a little bit more royal colored, you would mix a little bit of purple. Now it depends on what set you have. Everybody might have different sets. You may have a bigger set, which is really nice because you have more colors. But we're going to start off at the top, and basically what we're going to be doing is, so just kind of showing you how this works. I start to go across the top. And then what I'm creating is actually the sky around the clouds. So the white part of my paper is like the clouds. So sometimes I've gone back and I've added a little bit more, like a very light blue for some parts of the clouds. But that's what we're going to start off with. So we're going to start off and we're going to add a little bit of water to our brush. Actually, probably more like a lot of water. And I'm going to go really close so that you're able to see how I'm kind of doing this. So I dipped my brush in the blue, in the water, and I'm going to work kind of fast. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep dipping my brush in the water, and I'm going to spread it across because layers are your friend when it comes to watercolor. And so remember, I am creating the sky around the clouds. So it's almost like the opposite, how you would draw the clouds. Well, I'm kind of drawing the sky with the blue, and then I'm kind of making the lines for the puffiness of the clouds. See here, I'm making one right here. And I can always go back and I can fill it in. And I'm going to go back and make it darker, but for right now, we want to make, it as light. Oops, all right, well, that one wasn't so light. I did get a bit darker in this area, but what I'm going to do is I'm going in a circular motion, just like clouds, or even the sky that is sort of surrounding the clouds, because and if it helps you to kind of draw in the clouds a little bit beforehand, you can kind of do that. But you're going to I'm working on the left side, and then sometimes, I get a little bit darker up against on the right side of our Pelican here. And it doesn't have to look exactly like mine. You just want to make clouds. And leave space in between. But make sure you're going very light. I went a little dark there. And I'm pushing the water with my brush. And just deciding what parts do I want a little bit darker. What parts do I want a bigger cloud? I'm going to mix up some more blue here on the side. And kind of outlining my Pelican here. Let me go up a little bit. And if you don't like a line, you can go back in with water and kind of blend it away. All right. And now I'm finally kind of working left to right. I started off kind of working more on the left. And then finally started adding some to the right. And then I like to get a little bit darker as I'm getting closer toward the bottom. And so that's going to mean, well, at first, I'm just using this blue, but then I'm going to mix in the gray. And I can wet spaces that I've already wet before on the paper and kind of push them out with my brush. It's like a form of blending. So with the blue, I mixed some purple. So with this one in particular, I didn't have to because it's a different set than the Crayola. But if you want to get that royal blue and you're using Crayola or a lighter, a set with a lighter blue, you would do blue and some purple, and you would get more of like a royal blue like this. It'll even be a little bit darker than this, and it'll actually be really nice. And you can also add that to your sky. It doesn't just have to be like the gray and the blue. All right, so I'm continuing to kind of push out the sky and making clouds at the same time. You can see the edges here. And as I'm working downward, as I mentioned, I'm going to eventually get darker, but I'm still kind of going a little bit light. Out some of the water here. And then over here on the left, I'm going to stay up against the post here. So this is still just, the blue, but I want to now start darkening it up. And so I'm going to start off again right at the top. And I'm now going to start layering that blue. So I've added some water in order to get it to kind of blend. And I just go straight across the top. Then I'm going to start adding circular areas with a little bit darker application of the blue. And so again, I'm now thinking about where some of the darker clouds are. And you can even add just a tiny bit of little bit of water in the parts where you've left them white, and you can make like lighter clouds. Let me move my light source so that it's not so shiny. There we go. But as you can see, it's starting to get a little bit darker. And so I'm just going to act like, sometimes the tip of my brush is sort of like a pencil. I'm shading a little bit, but I also kind of push the color along. I'm going to go up toward his beak, make it a little darker around there. But again, I'm also curving, going around almost as if I'm making, clouds like you would, when you were a kid. Like puffy, even though this is really, the blue is really the sky. So you're kind of making the shape around, kind of like the colors around the clouds. If anything gets too dark, you just kind of lighten it up with some water. And towards the bottom here. Yes, Christine, absolutely. You can blot it. Absolutely. That's a great tip. Thank you. So what Christine was saying, you can also blot it with like, a piece of a paper towel. That does come off nice. I always forget about that, so thank you. Again, I do not pretend to be a watercolorist. Colored pencil is my main medium. So I'm still learning myself with the watercolor, but I really enjoy it. I too used to be afraid of it. And then I just kept kind of playing with it. Um, and it's all about sort of the water control. and when to do it. And I know that's hard. Um, so again, I kind of use, like right now I'm using a little bit of the gray. Well, I mixed the gray, black and blue. And now I'm pushing it into the sky. And I want some darker areas, like underneath his feathers. The sky is really, I think, the hardest part in this. The rest is really kind of lightly sort of shading things. Add a little more gray down here. And then I like to fill in the really white areas of the clouds with a little more sort of like very faint water. You can even pull some of that color from your sky into some of the whiter areas. Now, doesn't mean you cover all the whiter areas, but they also take sections and sort of blend. So I'm going to show this up close and what I mean. So I took a little bit of water right at the edge of where I sort of painted a cloud or the sky around the cloud. And I'm just pushing a little of that water to form whatever shape I want. In this case, I'm making, the sky and sort of the edge of the cloud, right? So I'm almost as if I'm drawing it, pushing that color in. I know I still have to film a tutorial for clouds. I know a few people asked me that, so I'm going to put that up on my YouTube channel. Probably in August. July is my busiest month in the summer. It's like everybody is finished with the first part of summer, and now we're kind of settling in. I'm gonna add a little bit more gray down here. I'm gonna lift up. And do it until, you like your sky. You can also, wait for things. Again, layering is your best friend. You wait for things to dry, and then maybe, I'm going to go back in and make this a little bit darker. Make it be a little more bolder. But the next part is, you can now go on top of your, the other parts are kind of really easy in the sense of color wise. So I like to kind of go into the bottom part here of, I'm going to mix up a little bit of some brown. And kind of do light washes in sections. So I'm going to add, this is just a little bit of brown. And so I'm going to mix in a little bit of brown, some brownish gray. So really brown and gray mixed, or black mixed together. You know, just making sort of, you know, driftwood type, you know, weathered wood, you know, that's been out at sea. You can choose to add a little bit of orange. I didn't do that originally, but I'm kind of thinking that might look a little good. And then I have a little bit of green and blue mixed together to make more of almost like a little bit of a turquoise. And if you look, what I'm doing is I'm kind of mixing it all in when it's wet so that it will kind of bloom, which means it will spread out because the water will spread it out. You know, and you are welcome to, you know, make parts of it darker. I didn't add much color to the bottom portion, but I just wanted it to look a little bit weathered. And then I start to move upward as far as, you know, adding the very muted orange to his beak. You know, the colors are very muted in this. You're welcome to make them, you know, a little more vibrant. So I added orange coming from the tip and then getting lighter as it goes up his beak. And I added a tiny bit of brown at the end here too, just to make it a little bit darker. A little bit of some golden yellow up here, which is really just yellow and brown. And just again, just a little bit. There actually isn't much color. It's really, you know, the black of the pen. But there's some orange around his eye. And I'm going to go a lot closer so you can kind of see now the detail. Now, and the next is really using a little bit of gray for his leg. And tiny bit for the feathers, but very lightly. That is, so I used watered down black so that it appears gray, just because I have a very basic set. So if you have gray, you can use gray, but if not, you know, like I said, little bit of some black watered down. And I just do like light touches on the leaves. I'm in fall mode still. But you can go back in after you've used your fine point marker. You now want to kind of let it dry. Paint it black. You could paint, yeah, this one black, but I actually used the marker on that. So I'm going to start going in on parts that are drier. So for instance, down here is drier for me. And so I'm going to start, kind of outlining. And, same with the rope. So basically, when you want something to stand out a little more, you're going to go over it again with your pen. So for instance, parts that are, something that has a little bit darker of a shadow, you can go back in, right? Like I'm going to color this in a little bit. Maybe there's a little bit of a shadow on it, like that. And I'm going to go around the rope. And again, there's that bumpiness on the outside. And I'm going to go in and kind of follow along where it's starting to, bunch up. Okay, now this one. Okay, and then I'm going to start adding in the lines for the knotty wood. So sometimes, I'm going to kind of leave it alone and just make lines. And then other times, I kind of make like the knot. I like making the wood. I think it's one of my favorite parts. It's kind of fun. And then this is, I feel like this is the fun part, getting to, fill in the details using the pen. Um, Going in now, starting with the eye. I'm going to go in really close. Because now you can do things like, make the edge of him definitely look like he's got some hair sticking up. And so when I'm kind of outlining him, I skip spaces with the fur so that it looks like, sometimes it's kind of bunching together. Gives it that impression. His beak as well. I make very kind of subtle lines. But then I start making, some darker lines right above his beak and, the hairs and the fur around it. So this is all fur. Oops. And so this fur, you're going to go on top of the paper, and you're going to make, strokes going either way, how the fur would. This is the part that's kind of detailed. It's fun. And we're going to start as far as the feathers go. I like to kind of, outline the ones along the edge. And you can add some underneath with the pen. And then they kind of switch direction when it's getting towards his tail. And you start layering. You can make some, looser feathers out of, kind of sticking out a little bit. That would be realistic, have a feather stuck out a little bit. Remember, his back leg is in shadow. And I don't make it completely black. I make some of it a um, little bit lighter. And then even the feathers underneath, I do them as individual strokes, even though I'm kind of curling, kind of curving the lines. And then making sure some stick out towards the bottom. little bit darker kind of underneath there where there'd be some shadow where the feathers are kind of clustered. Making his little knobby knees. Like I said, I don't know if he has knees, but I'm gonna pretend like he does. And the rest is really feathers. So, fur and feathers. More spread out curves of fur on the front of him. And using, going in sort of little sections. And then getting a little bit thicker towards his belly. Like your strokes getting a little closer. And then finally, doing the feathers on top. Kind of like V or U-like shapes and kind of layering them over each other. Now it's just strokes and adding kind of layered feathers on top. I like to go in and erase some of my pencil marks that are still showing through. And I do add a little bit of gray. Right where his neck is. And, you can go back in and add a little more, on parts of his feathers. You could probably add a little bit of some brown, yellow, and orange too to the rope real fast. If you wanted to. But I'm so curious to see what these look like. I'm gonna give it another minute. Just gonna add a little more gold and yellow up here, I think. going to remove my spotlight and I'm going to stop the recording.